All right, I'm going to be comparing the stats of a welcome flow that was set up by this brand's previous agency. Before we started working together, their previous agency had this welcome flow set up. And then when we started working together, I saw that it was, in my opinion, it was shit. And we'll go over why. And then, usually when brands have relatively terrible welcome flows, rather than we just try to salvage it, we'll just revamp the whole thing. So that's what we did here. We're going to see if we made an improvement or if we made it worse by comparing the stats of these two. So let's dive in. All right. So welcome email one. And before we get into all the stats, just for context here, this is a relatively seasonal brand. They sell swing sets. So their high season is going to be in typically around the spring, anywhere from March to May. So we took over this brand right as they were coming out of their high season. So all the stats that we have are during their off season. All right. So just to give you some context there, if anything, that's going to be in favor of the metrics for the previous agency, but we'll see how big of a difference it made. So this is their welcome email one. And then let's check out the stats of ours right here. So if we compare these two, all right, so we have 35% open rate versus 50% open rate, 8% click rate versus 12%, 1.9% placed order versus 3.3% placed order. So, like I mentioned, this was during their off season. So if this was during their peak season, and then our stats would completely destroy their previous stats. But anyways, first thing that I saw when I was auditing their account and sort of when we took over their account, when I was planning what we were going to do, was their super low open rate. So they were at 35% open rate, which is pretty shit. So, and let me explain why. So typically for people who just signed up, you're going to see anywhere from, 50% open rate is considered, relatively normal. 40% is okay. There's a lot of room for improvement. Like I would suggest, different ways to get this up to 60% plus. Below 40%, it's like, all right, this is a huge problem, and this is something that needs to be fixed. So, and I have other threads going about this on Twitter, going over how we resuscitate brands' open rates. And when the open rates are low, basically what that means is the brand's emails are being sent to the promo tab or the spam folder. So you need to fix that first. That's what we did here. We have a whole anti-spam protocol. We were able to get them from 35% to 50%, which obviously is good. So they went from 8% to 13% on the click rate. That is due to the structure of the email, as well as, how relevant the content is and how persuasive the content is. All right. Because if it's irrelevant and just overall is not good at keeping people's attention and converting them to a click, then obviously people aren't going to click. All right. So, and then 2% placed order. That's going to come down to how we frame the offer, as well as email structure, plus the supporting sort of persuasion content. So let's see here. So what they did here is they chose to set up a conditional split, which essentially resends, like the idea behind this is to resend this welcome email one to anybody who doesn't open in the first 24 hours. But in this case, they decided to go with 9. So this is a relatively common tactic, one that I employ myself for certain brands. But I disagreed with their choice to send it after 8 hours in this case. But even more important than that, the conditional split was set up incorrectly, which you can see by the 100% being sent down the no path. So when this is working correctly, a certain percentage of people are going to be sent down the yes path. So typically it's going to be at least 50%, but in this case it's 0. So what that means is this variable right here, this equals random numbers, that means it's pointing to the wrong email to check if they opened it or not. So this agency didn't see that, which obviously is a mistake, and it meant that all new subscribers were being spammed by the same email twice, which obviously you don't want. Also, the time delay was too short. I wrote notes about this here as well, resulting in sending 2 emails in one day and potentially when they're asleep. So imagine, they come home from work, they're shopping on their phone at 6 p.m. 8 hours later would be 2 p.m. So, or 2 a.m., where the vast majority of people are asleep at that time. So, yeah, this doesn't make sense to me. So what I did is wait one day, and if anybody hasn't opened it in the past 24 hours, then they get resent the welcome email once. So we actually just started testing this. It doesn't work for every account. It works for around 50%. So this one's going to need more data, but if the stats don't play out that well, then we'll just cut it. And typically what I'm looking for is some amount of place orders and at least a 20% open rate, but 10% is pretty bad, but we'll see how this plays out. All right, so now we're going to compare welcome emails 2 and 3. All right, so as you can see right here, ours outperformed theirs, but here's why. So, and here, let's actually dig into the stats a little bit. So this one has a higher open rate. All right, theirs actually dropped to 27%. Their open rate on welcome email 2 actually wasn't too bad. It's pretty similar to ours. Ours had a higher click rate. I'll explain why here in a second. Higher place order rates. But essentially what you need to know about these is the biggest difference between these two is the two that they set up were essentially hard pitching the same offer as welcome email 1, which is dumb because the people who didn't buy on welcome email 1, and actually in their case they were seeing the same offer twice. So if they've seen it twice, the reason they're not buying isn't because they're not aware of the offer because they didn't see it. That's not why they're not buying. They're not buying because they have certain questions or objections in their head that you haven't answered. All right. So let's think about the customer here for a second. So they come to your guys' website via a social post or an ad. They don't really know anything about you. They're not a customer. All they did is just signed up for, your welcome offer in exchange for their email, which is an easy, trade for a lot of people. But other than that, they don't know anything about your brand in most cases. So if you are trying to pitch them and they don't buy right away, you're not answering what they need to know about the brand. So a few things is like, all right, is this brand even legit? All right, that's the main thing in their head because there's a ton of, drop shipping, low quality e-commerce stores where you buy something and then 3 weeks go by and you don't receive anything and they basically just stole your money. So they need to make sure that you're not that, especially on high ticket brands, which in this case they are. You need to really build up in their head this picture of you being a legitimate brand that operates, somewhere, in reality versus some fly by night operation, sort of scam operation. All right. So how do you do that? So number one is going to be social proof, show real customer reviews from sort of, real buyers. Number two is brand story. All right. Who actually is this brand? Because they don't have anything in their head of who these people are. There's a lot of brands where, they don't have any sort of brand story because they are a scam operation. It's just some dude who wants to, and I'm sure you have experiences of this as well, where you buy something and it just never comes to you. It's like they just stole my money. So in this case, the brand actually had a really interesting brand story, so we just used it. It's like, all right, back in the 1980s, it was set up by our predecessors, and now we've taken it over, and all this stuff. And it's actually really interesting. So we used it, and it legitimizes the brand, but also social proof. It's like, okay, that increases the brand perception. It's like, okay, this is a legitimate brand. People love the products. That increases the certainty that they're going to have, that they're going to love the product, and they're much more likely to purchase from you. And you can see that with the stats. So here's what happens when you just spam the offer. All right. You get a 0.5% placed order rate. Okay, fair enough. That outperformed our placed order rate. But then you also got to keep in mind, this was during their high season where I could have said anything and I probably would have had the same placed order rate as them. So during the high season, and the great thing is this is content. So if I have the same placed order rate as them, but I'm sending content and they're hard pitching them, the content automatically wins because that's increasing the quote unquote social capital with the customer versus a hard pitch, which decreases the social capital. And what I mean by that is, when you go up to somebody and you start selling them, let's say, imagine yourself in real life, and you hard pitch them a bunch and they reject you a bunch, and let's say you do that 3 times in a row, you kind of get annoyed. Like at first you're like, haha, thanks, but no. And then after a while, it's like you spam the same offer 3 times. And it's like, all right, leave me alone. Like that's what happens when you deplete the social capital. Versus if you build up the social capital, which you can do by content, sending them, educational content about the product, sort of like building up the perception of the product that way, where it's like it's built with the finest materials and all of this stuff. Or you send them, customer reviews, which builds up the perception of the brand that way. It's like, okay, it's a more premium product. They're much more likely to be receptive to an offer in the future because you've built up that social capital. It's like, all right, you sent me valuable stuff about, whether it's about the brand or even helping them solve, problems that they're trying to deal with. So value-based content is what I'd recommend typically on welcome emails 2 and 3, and that's what we saw here. So, and then their welcome email 3 was just a straight up failure. I mean, like, what is this? So yeah. Overall, this was a massive success of the revamp of their welcome series. And down here, I'm not going to show it on this video here, but we're also testing out different angles for welcome emails 4 and 5 to lengthen the flow. Right now, we're sending value content down there as well, getting good engagement, not necessarily getting, a ton of sales on those yet, which is what we're currently trying to figure out. So, I mean, that's sort of what the process looks like when you're trying to, optimize a flow and lengthen the flow, is always trying to test different angles and see what resonates best with the audience. But anyways, thanks so much for watching this video. Hope you got something out of it. Other than that, thanks so much for following my Twitter, and have a good rest of your day.